This podcast is a member of the Place to Be Nation family. Visit us at placetobenation.com, the only place to be in your pop culture world.
Hello, Place to Be Nation listeners. I am Greg Phillips, and with me is my cohort over at Place to Be Nation Pops, Hard Traveling Fanboys, Nick Duke. And we have decided to grace or disgrace your presence.
Definitely disgrace.
With ours here over on the wrestling feed, because we are debuting what we're considering a pilot episode of a planned Podblast series, easy for me to say, that will be combining a concept that we're quite familiar with over in the world of comics, called What If, or, if you prefer, What If, over from Marvel Comics, and applying that to the world of professional wrestling. Nick and I are both lifelong wrestling fans as well, and still watch from week to week on WWE's various programs, and we thought we'd take a look at different pro wrestling scenarios over the years and seeing what if those scenarios turned out differently than they did in real life. So it's going to be a little bit of fantasy booking here, a little bit of speculation, really, of what happened, and most importantly, for your purposes, it's going to be short.
Yes.
So
between the sheets, we are not.
No, you're quite the opposite. In fact, you're probably not going to learn much of anything here,
Nope.
And in fact, you're probably going to instantly dismiss our opinions.
Yes,
but
and if you're looking for star ratings or anything to update your spreadsheet with, just go ahead and hit that delete button.
That's with somebody else, baby. But anyway, real quick, just to introduce ourselves, we are the Hard Traveling Fanboys. I'm Greg Phillips. You can hear me every week with Nick on the Hard Traveling Fanboys, the longest running weekly episodic comic book podcast in all of Place to Be Nation.
We didn't even do that on our own weekly show this week, by the way.
We sure didn't. And yes, you can catch us on that every week. I'm also a part of the new Talkin' WCW podcast right here at the Wrestling Feed alongside my excellent co-hosts Tim Capel and Jennifer Smith. And Nick can be found also on the Marvel Age podcast, which is taking a look at the history of the Marvel Universe year by year. He also can be found occasionally on Marvel Age Masterclass, hosted by none other than former comics professional Ben Morse. So you can catch both of us in various places. But let's get to the nitty-gritty of this. So what we started out with as a scenario for this pilot episode is...
We instantly said we didn't want to do the Montreal Screwjob because I'm sure if we wind up doing a bunch of these, we will do it at some point just to kind of give our own take on it. But that's one that I think has been debated to death over the last 20 years, and there's not really much we feel the need to add right out of the gate on that, at least from my perspective anyway.
Right, and so what we decided to look at was another one that we just we found ourselves talking about this very topic of what if wrestling, sort of in a casual phone conversation, and it evolved into this Podblast topic. So we wanted to take a look at the much rumored near departure of Ric Flair from the NWA in 1988. And we're looking at the scenario of what if, as was originally planned, according to people like Bruce Pritchard, what if Ric Flair had jumped from the NWA to the WWF in August of 1988 and appeared on the Brother Love show at SummerSlam that year?
Yes.
Ric Flair, of course, at the time, was the NWA World's Heavyweight Champion. He would have been jumping over to the WWF at the height of the Mega Powers' dominance as a tag team, as a combined force in the WWF. This was a seismic move in the wrestling industry. Ric Flair was the top guy in the South. Hogan was the top guy nationwide. So they'd both be on the same on the same team, essentially, in the same company, and the NWA would be left without its perennial world champion, the guy who had really dominated Crockett Promotions throughout the decade of the 80s. So how do you want to approach this, Nick? How should we get this convo started here?
Well, I guess you kind of want to take. Do you want to take it from the NWA aspect or the WWF aspect first?
Let's take the WWF aspect first, because I think that's the one that we were talking about the most. Of how would this have changed the course of history for the World Wrestling Federation?
So Flair himself, back in the summer of 2017, gave an interview to Sports Illustrated where he said that the plans were in place for him to jump, much as Bruce Pritchard has alluded to, and that there was plans for him to jump, debut at SummerSlam '88. And then go on to wrestle, be instantly placed into a program with Randy Savage for the WWF title, headlining garden shows, and I would assume build to something for either probably Survivor Series that year or possibly the Royal Rumble. Hard to say when that match, the big blow-off, would have actually taken place, but it seems like plans were in place for Flair to jump over and take on Savage. So the first thing that kind of brings up in my mind is, what does that do to the Mega Powers angle? Because the Mega Powers angle, as we all know, would culminate at WrestleMania 5 in 1989. If Flair jumps to feud with Savage, does he take the title off of him? And if so, what becomes of the Mega Powers? I think it's the most interesting place to start it.
Absolutely, because you've got a couple scenarios here. So scenario one, I think, would be, does the Macho Man hold on to the title, and you do the Mega Power angle as you had already planned it, according to most of the people involved in that was the plan, was to have Savage and Hogan explode and wrestle each other at WrestleMania 5. Or does the Ric Flair wrench in the plan? Do you switch the belt to Flair and go with Flair versus Hogan at WrestleMania 5 and delay the Mega Powers split?
Yes.
And then would the Mega Powers split have as much power at that point with Savage not being the champion?
That's debatable, but I think if you're going to bring Flair in, now granted, there's always that possibility that Vince McMahon in 1988 may have not have seen as much value in Ric Flair as we fans do or would have at the time, but I would think you almost certainly have to do Flair and Savage right there after the jump. You probably are going to swap the belt onto Flair and get ready to do Flair and Hogan for WrestleMania 5. But the utility of keeping the Mega Powers together is something that can be used throughout that entire build, because later in '88, of course, we would see Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard also jump to the WWF. And instantly, you start thinking about ways to pair those guys together, especially if you're going to put them together with Bobby Heenan, who, of course, had the long-running feud with Hulk Hogan to this point and is one of the greatest talkers in the history of the business. So then you start getting into the element of, could you have seen, I don't know what the copyrights were like at the time, but could you have seen a Four Horsemen-like faction running up against the Mega Powers in the WWF? And if so, what does that look like? Who becomes the fourth guy? All kinds of interesting questions. And something I would have loved to have seen, an even longer run for the Mega Powers throughout both 88 and 89.
Let's stick a pin in the Mega Powers for a moment, and let's get back to the Horseman angle here, because by November of '88, Arn and Tully are fed up, and they're out of the NWA, and they're in the WWF. And I think that happens especially if Flair leaves. That gives them even more reason to want to leave and to go to the WWF. So if you were to do a hypothetical Four Horsemen faction, and let's say that Bruce Pritchard and Pat Patterson and some of the other guys get in Vince's ear and tell him, this is a good idea. And at that time, remember, the WWF loved heel factions. We had the Heenan family. We had Jimmy Hart's crew. We had Slick's crew. There were a lot of heel factions at that time. So you put the Four Horsemen, or in this case, the Three Horsemen with Bobby Heenan managing them, and then you get a fourth guy at some point. And you imagine them feuding with the Mega Powers. Imagine a Survivor Series match of, let's say that your Four Horsemen are Flair, Arn, Tully, and then Mr. Perfect was not just getting out of the gates at that point, but let's say you stick Curt Hennig in that group.
Rick Rude
for that matter. And can you imagine them taking on the Mega Powers and the Rockers at a Survivor Series, or the Mega Powers and and hell, you could just fill out
Heart Foundation,
baby faces, Heart Foundation, the Mega Powers, and Ultimate Warrior, and somebody. You know,
man, yeah.
Which, you know, then the problem is, would Vince be able to resist the temptation to book the heels like total losers? That's another aspect of this. Is would he protect the Horsemen enough to make them viable? And here's the other thing. By 89 in real life, Barry Windham is in the WWF. Mm-hmm. I don't think that happens if Flair jumps, because the domino is then Turner is put in a situation where they have to pay money to keep Barry Windham. They can't afford to lose Flair, Anderson, Blanchard, and Windham, right?
No, there's no way. You can't lose all of those guys, because Barry Windham is in an age where essentially you've just lost the guy who's been your main event in this scenario for the last 6 years or longer even. So you're looking at having to elevate new talent into that main event scene that would probably come in the form of, I'm guessing, Lex Luger, I'm guessing Sting, probably Barry Windham, as you said. But before we address before we jump over to the Jim Crockett aspect of it, or the Turner aspect, or the WCW/WA aspect of it all, let's go ahead and lay out. So before we close the book on the WWF side,
yeah,
how would you have booked the angle? Like, lay it out give us a high level year. Take it out as far to whatever you think the natural conclusion is.
So, me personally, I think the Mega Powers angle was so perfect as it is that I wouldn't change it.
Okay.
I keep it the way it is. I keep the belt on Savage.
So what is?
And I have Flair. I have Flair involved in a top level mid card angle. I maybe even have Flair come in and be a thorn in the side of Hulk Hogan for a few months, and have them interact with one another, but not really have a singles blow off match, because I have someone else sort of come in there, maybe a Hacksaw Duggan or
the Warrior, perhaps.
A Warrior or not a Warrior, because I wouldn't want to sacrifice Flair to Warrior, and I wouldn't want to sacrifice Warrior winning streak. Brutus Beefcake, perfect example. He was a very over mid card act at that time. I would have him and Flair feud maybe throughout the winter and spring, set up a match at WrestleMania 5, and then I'd do the Mega Powers angle as it was, and then by the time you get to SummerSlam 89 and Savage just cooled off, then that's when you really have Flair start pursuing the big belt, the top title, and I would have Flair be undefeated at that point in the company, and kind of even give him Mr. Perfect's undefeated gimmick that he had going into 1990. And then you have Flair and Hogan, and you can do that at either SummerSlam, you can do that at, as you might have mentioned, Survivor Series or Royal Rumble. You could probably, given the pace of television then, stretch that all the way into WrestleMania 6, which really makes it interesting.
Yes.
Because what happens to the Ultimate Warrior in all of this? So, and does Hogan, presumably Hogan still wants to go off and make movies. So you're left in a little bit of a babyface pickle there with both Savage and Flair on the heel side. You'll be left with eventually part-time Hogan and Warrior on the babyface side. So, I can see how that could be. But I personally, to answer your overall question, I don't want to lose the Mega Powers angles. I think it's a perfect storyline. And I think Flair then becomes the focus going into SummerSlam 89 and beyond.
I like that. But just to be a little different, I would say you go ahead after the debut at SummerSlam 88. You do the feud with Savage throughout the fall and into Rumble season, and that's where you do the big switch. And you have Flair, by hook or by crook, at this point with involvement from Arn, Tully, and a fourth guy, maybe Rick Rude, I think kind of makes the most sense after talking about it, essentially conspire to screw over Savage. Flair gets the title. And this way, you can have Savage say, here I was backing you up all this time, but where were you when I needed you eventually? Mm-hmm. So then, instead of Savage getting the rematch at WrestleMania, you do Hogan. Hogan wins the title, and that plants the seed then for Savage to eventually do the turn a little bit later than what he would have. You continue that feud into SummerSlam 89, and then after some big tag match, probably Arn and Flair against Hogan and Savage, Savage turns on Hogan, and there's your build into 1990, and Mega Powers happens 1 year later at WrestleMania 6. But as you said, then you get into the what happens to Warrior of it all, and how does that work with Hogan again wanting to leave to go do some movies for a little bit. Do you have to put Savage over there? And if so, do you then build maybe Warrior and Savage for SummerSlam 90? So lots of interesting things on the WWF side, but I think I would kind of go ahead and just right off the bat try to get Flair Hogan as soon as possible, because as we know, later on when Flair would come in, something they never really did in a big high-profile setting.
And if anything, as good as Flair and Hogan was when we finally got it in WCW in 94, this would have been even better because you're getting both guys in their primes. You're getting Ric Flair still at the... I mean, Ric Flair, remember, going into 89 is going to have his best career year in the ring in 1989. And you put him up against a Hulk Hogan who is still rocking and rolling with his formula at that time, in his athletic peak. So that would have been amazing. And forget about Flair and Savage, 3 years before when Savage's knees were in much better shape. Just an outstanding situation here. 4 years rather earlier. Just an outstanding situation up and down the card. Now, who is left in not as outstanding a situation is WCW or the NWA, owned by Ted Turner this time, the WCW branch of the NWA. They're kind of screwed here. Yeah. Because they have lost their world champion, the guy that they will build their company around throughout 1989, the following year. They are left with a Dusty Rhodes who is on his way out the door due to... I'm going to assume, Nick, that Dusty still leaves because he's still going to get fired by the company due to his booking mandates more than anything else, and that's going to lead to him leaving. So I'm going to assume that maintains the same. I'm going to assume they keep Barry Windham. I'm going to assume they even keep a guy like a Ronnie Garvin, who is not a huge player really, but they can't afford to lose anybody else in this deal. They're losing literally 3 champions in this whole changeover here. So you're looking at a situation where you have to build the company around Lex Luger and Sting as your top babyface.
So that's a great example, because right there in this scenario, the last NWA pay-per-view event before SummerSlam 88 would have been the Great American Bash that saw Flair defeat Luger for the NWA World Title in the main event. Do you keep that match the same if you know Flair's on the way out the door, or do you change it to somebody else, or do you just keep it the same and have Luger go over?
You have to have the belt on Luger, in my opinion, at that point. Whether not necessarily that Luger's the guy, but you have to. You can't have Flair leave as the champion. And I think at that time, as big a Sting fan as I am, and as much as I think Sting was better at that time, Luger was the right choice. And so Luger's got to be your guy. You put the belt on him. You put all the eggs in the Lex Luger basket, which a lot of long-time Crockett WCW fans would argue should have been the case even at that time. And then you have Luger as your top babyface. You have Sting as your 1A, and he's the young guy, the upstart that's being built up. And you got these 2 hot young babyfaces that are kind of carrying your card. And then you got to figure out who's your top heel. And I think the obvious choice here is to elevate Barry Windham from the U.S. title up to the world title level and make him your top heel, which has always kind of been the NWA's thing, is building around the top heel. Yeah, I think in this case, I would like to see them try the WWF approach of just putting all their eggs in the Luger basket and see how it works. But Windham has to be your top heel. Maybe he rebuilds a new Horseman with him as in the Ric Flair role, a new generation Horseman. And I'm looking at their roster here, and they're really not. They don't have a lot of options to join that, but maybe so maybe you get Windham, you get the Midnight Express.
Yeah, I was going to say,
and you get somebody else to be the heavy of the group, and you have Windham lead that. This, of course, leaves the mid card wide open. Ricky Steamboat's coming eventually, but not until early '89. So you gotta, that solves a lot of problems when you get him in. So by that point, maybe I do put the title on Windham and have him go through. Have to deal with the challenges of Luger, Sting, rematches, Sting eventually being built up, and then Steamboat in the interim. So I still think NWA has a good in-ring year in terms of Barry Windham was a damn fine wrestler, not that far off when he was on from Ric Flair at that time. and you can still have great matches up and down the card potentially. I think your mid card suffers badly, and I think by mid '89 you're really dealing with a depth problem.
Yeah, because like you said, you're kind of stuck with having to build around a trio of Wyndham, Sting, and Luger, and Sting has got to be your babyface. It got to be a babyface at all times, and once you've done Sting and Wyndham, what else do you have for Sting in terms of top level?
You have to turn Luger.
You have to turn Luger by that point, and so what do? Like maybe Luger is the chain upon Flair's departure. He drops to Wyndham. Wyndham drops to Sting, and then you do Sting and Luger the following year, I guess.
I think so.
That gets you through about a year to 16 months.
You do. So one scenario, as I'm spitballing here, Luger holds the belt throughout the fall of '88, drops it to Wyndham at Starrcade, maybe.
There you go.
In typical WCW fashion, where the heel goes over at the biggest show of the year. Wyndham fends off another challenge or two from Luger, moves on to Steamboat in the spring, do this double switch they did with Flair, have Steamboat win the title from Wyndham. Wyndham wins it back from Steamboat, but then don't do the angle with Funk. He can still come back and feud with Luger in the interim. Well, in the meantime, that would be a great thing for Sting to do. Terry Funk comes back as a crazy old man wanting to take out the hot young upstart Sting. Luger is doing something in the interim. I don't know. And maintaining that he and Sting are aligned. Muta comes in. We forgot about Muta.
Yeah.
Muta comes in '89. So Muta and Sting, Luger and Funk can trade feuds with each other while Wyndham and Steamboat are going at it. Eventually, Sting gets Wyndham, wins the belt from him, and then Luger comes out to celebrate with him and lays him out. And then you've got your big feud for 1990 and for the foreseeable future of your top two stars, Sting and Luger. What do you think, Nick?
I actually like that scenario a lot. The only counter to that would be, you had just had Sting in a star-making performance at Clash '88. Is there not even, or the first Clash in March of '88, is there not at least a little temptation if Flair's leaving the company to go ahead and do Sting and Flair on Flair's way out and have Sting be the one to take it off of him instead of Luger? Like, I think ultimately I'm with you. I'm on the side of putting the belt on Luger as opposed to Sting, but I think there's an argument to be made there that there was a Sting-Flair aspect of it that needed some resolution if Flair was going to leave the company.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's a good point. I mean, I think it wasn't time yet for Sting, but on the other hand, I do see the argument there because he was red hot and he was coming off of his star-making performance, and it would give him a chance to get a leg up and revenge on the guy that was leaving the company. So I do see that scenario, and I think that one thing that we talked about this a little bit with Barry Windham and Ronnie Garvin. I think that WCW and Turner ups their financial commitment to keeping their roster together. We may even see some defections from the WWF.
That's true.
But without being able to speculate on that, knowing the contract at the time, I think the Great Muta is going to be a huge part of WCW moving forward at this point. And you have to weather the storm and accept the fact that you're going to get absolutely obliterated in buy rates and everything else for the next year and a half to 2 years, and then hope that your youth movement pays off.
And hope, that Flair is on a short-term deal with the WWF, relatively short-term anyway, and that you can talk him into coming back at some point.
Yep, absolutely. Well, with all that said, I mean, I don't want to keep belaboring these points, Nick, but do you have anything else to add about this what if Ric Flair jump scenario?
No, I think we covered it in about the length that we were looking to cover it, so there you go.
There you have it. Well, we may or may not be back to do this again, but I had fun talking about it. It was fun little chat. We hope you guys enjoyed it. I'm sure that you guys have your own takes on this, so let us know. We're both available on Twitter. I am at gphillips8652. That's Phillips with 2 L's. He is at nickduke87. And we would be very interested in getting your thoughts on this scenario. What happens if Ric Flair jumps to the WWF at SummerSlam 1988?
And
anyway,
if you enjoyed it, if you enjoyed this Podblast, we're kind of in for topics. So if you've got some cool what ifs that you've always liked to throw around, or you would like to hear us throw around, throw those out there. I think we could pretty easily have listeners source our ideas for the show so that we don't have to creative at all, which would be great.
And one of the other things that we talked about with this, which we're still kind of figuring this out as we do it, this pilot episode, and assuming that we do want to come back and do more of these and that you guys want to hear more of them, We also talked about kicking it around from not just from a booking standpoint or from a real life standpoint, but kicking some kayfabe what if scenarios. So if you guys have some of those that you might be interested in, let us know about that too. But in any event, you have our Twitter addresses, our Twitter handles. We also have email addresses, greg@placetobenation.com, nickd@placetobenation.com. We don't check those very much, so we prefer you to tweet us. And anyway, that's pretty much it for this pilot edition, and we may be back to see you again. If not, we will be back certainly on our weekly show, Hard Traveling Fanboys. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Promotional consideration paid for by the following.
Place to Be Nations, JT Rosero and Chad Campbell here. We want to let you know that we have over 24 podcasts available on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and PlaceToBeNation.com. We now offer them to you on 2 great feeds. On the Place to Be Nation Wrestling feed, we dive into topics running the gamut from today's WWE to the glory days of yesteryear and the ins and outs of the territory days. In addition to our full-length shows, we also deliver to you special Podblasts on topics old and new.
The Place to Be Nation Pop feed is a veritable treasure trove of great content. Offered tremendous shows covering the land of movies, television, life, comics, and sports, brought to you by the most knowledgeable and insightful folks in the podcast world.
You can find all these great shows, plus archives of our past podcasts from over the past 8 years as well by subscribing to both feeds on iTunes. And while you're there, be sure to rate and leave feedback as well. All of these shows, plus others, available on PlaceToBeNation.com, where we cover pro wrestling, sports, movies, comics, plus in-depth search projects, and much more. Be sure to support our site by using www.PlaceToBeNation.com/Amazon when doing your online shopping. We want to thank our friends at Boneheads Wing Bar, ProWrestlingOnly.com, and TheHistoryOfWrestling.com as well. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Tumblr. PlaceToBeNation.com, the only place to be in your pop culture.